very good morning to all of you. I welcome you all to the second day of the EnviStats India GIS webinar. Yesterday we had some very interesting presentations on some of the very important and crucial areas related to the environment. Today we are again geared up with another set of fascinating presentations. Water is essential for the sustenance of human life and the economy. In context of a typical Sorry for the interruptions. Water is essential for the sustenance of human life and the economy. In context of a typical ecosystem, water has a dual role to play. It is not only a service from ecosystems, but also a rich ecosystem in itself. Water quality accounts are one of the most effective ways to describe the quality of water and to assist in the formulation of appropriate policies by various environmental agencies. These accounts not only allow for comparable across water bodies or across time periods, but can also be used in assessments of impacts of pollution and can help evaluate the policies aimed at decreasing pollution or improving the state of water bodies. I now request Shri Krishna Tiwari to walk us through the water quality accounts in India. Over to you, Krishna.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning, all of you. On behalf of the Ministry, I welcome you all in this EnviStats India GIS webinar. And in continuation of the yesterday's presentation, I am going to speak about the application of GIS in water quality accounts. Water is essential for the sustenance of human life and the economy. In context of a typical ecosystem, water has a dual role. It is not only a service from ecosystems, but also a rich ecosystem in itself. Water is also closely related to socio-economic development. Water has cross-sectoral linkages with various sectors such as food, energy, agriculture, industries, urban development, and others. Thus cannot be considered in isolation and making it challenging for the policymaker to apportion diminishing supplies between ever-increasing demands. Factors such as demography and climate change further increase the stress on water resources and highlighting the need for water security. In marine regions, the availability of water in both quantity and quality is being severely affected by climate variability and climate change, with more or less precipitation in different regions and more extreme weather events. Thus, water resource management plays an important role. Integrated water resource management is a process that promotes the coordinated development and management of water, land, and related resources in order to maximize the resultant economic and social welfare in an equitable manner without compromising the sustainability of vital ecosystem. Integrated water resource management is not an end but a means of achieving sustainable management of water resources, not just for the quantity but for the quality as well. Its relevance is depicted from the fact that target 6.5 of Sustainable Development Goal is by 2030 implement integrated water resources management at all levels, including through transboundary cooperation as appropriate, and especially indicator 6.5.1, which indicates the degree of integrated water resources management implementation. Water demands are fulfilled by various sources of water supply, such as water bodies like rivers, lakes and ponds, groundwater and others. As a result of growing population, increased level of developmental activities, industrialization and urbanization, and also an increase in disposal of solid waste from urban and industrial hubs has posed a threat for environment due to haphazard discharges into natural water sources and indiscriminate dumping in the agriculture field. All these have resulted in water quality degradation despite the development of water resources with space and time. Further, water contaminated with heavy metals like arsenic, lead and cadmium has been associated with skin cancer, anemia, headache, suppression of immune system, softening of bones and kidney failure. Dumping of sewage into water bodies directly result in accumulation of toxic substances and depletion of oxygen, which not only affects the water quality but also affects the aquatic life and the food chain of birds and animals. Clean water is critical to survival, and its absence can impact the health, food security, and livelihood of families across the world. Almost one-fifth of the child deaths in India are due to diarrhea, although overall proportion of Indian households with access to improved water sources increased from 68% in 1992-93 to 89.9% in 2015-16, but still there is a need of significant improvement. In this regard, Government of India has introduced number of schemes and programs with the same objective. The importance of water quality is illustrated through the fact that Sustainable Development Goal 6 is dedicated to clean water and sanitation, and especially Target 6.3 aims to improve ambient water quality, which is vital to protect both ecosystem health and human health by eliminating, minimizing, and significantly reducing different streams of pollution into water bodies. Also, the associated indicator 6.3.2 reflects the proportion of bodies of water with good ambient water quality. Good indicates an ambient water quality that doesn't damage ecosystem function and human health according to core ambient water quality parameters. Water quality can be assessed using physical, chemical, and biological parameters. Water can be harmful for health when the values of these parameters are outside the defined limit. Water quality accounts are one of the most effective ways to describe the quality of water and to assist in the formulation of appropriate policies by various environmental agencies. In general, water quality can be assessed on the basis of water usage functions or against general standards. Water quality accounts can provide a valuable support to policy making because they can help set standards and objectives, check compliance, and assess the efficacy of the policy measures. The water quality accounts also allow for comparability across water bodies by providing information on trends across time. It can also be used in assessment of the impact of pollution and can help evaluate the policies aimed at decreasing pollution or improving the state of water bodies. Thus, water accounts can assist in a wide range of analytical and policy situations. Water quality accounts can also help evolve water quality indices, which provide tangible information about water purity and facilitate a better system of quality monitoring. Importance of water quality indices can be highlighted from its various uses. These indices may be applied in water-related decisions to assist managers in allocating funds and determining priorities. Ranking of the location by comparing the environmental conditions at different locations or geographical areas. Indices can be used at a specific location to determine the extent to which legislative standards and existing criteria are being met or exceeded. Indices can also be applied to environmental data at different locations in time to determine the challenge in environmental quality which have occurred over a period of time. Indices can also be used to inform the public about the environmental conditions. These indices may be applied as means for reducing large quantity of data to a form that gives insight to the research and conducting a study of some environmental programs. In view of the importance of keeping a check on the water quality, in India there exists a large network of monitoring stations consisting of about 25,000 sites for groundwater and almost 2,000 sites for surface water across the different states of the country, operated by different departments, mainly by Central Water Commission for surface water and by Central Groundwater Board for groundwater. The complexity exists in interpreting the status of water quality from the data available from different monitoring sites, thus highlighting the need to specify the water quality status using indicators that are easier to interpret. Water Quality Index and water accounts are an effective tool to describe the quality of water and to assist in the formulation of appropriate policies by various environmental agencies. Considering the importance of water quality, MOSPE's Interministerial Group on Environmental Economic Accounting in India constituted a subgroup on the compilation of indices relating to water quality under the chairpersonship of Additional Secretary, Department of Water Resources, River Development and Ganga Rejuvenation, Ministry of Jal Shakti, with the experts from Central Water Commission, Central Groundwater Board, Central Pollution Control Board, National Center for Coastal Research, and Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change to work out the methodology for development of water quality index for surface, ground, and marine water, along with the parameters, their weights, and standards permissible limits. It was envisaged that these indices account will provide the linkages between environment and the economy and enable assessment of the disservices done by the economy to the environment in terms of degradation, and also help in identifying the areas warranting focused intervention for taking remedial measures and evaluations. Based on the discussion in the subgroup, methodology as recommended by SIA Water has been adapted to compile water quality accounts based on designated best use quality classes for surface and groundwater. SIA Water describes methodology to assess the water quality through water quality accounts, since quality is an important characteristic of water and can limit its use. Quality accounts describe the quality of a stock of water resources, and water quality is reported in the form of discrete classes. For each water body, a standard can be defined with respect to some threshold. These thresholds are based on either natural or on legal requirement. For surface water, we have used the 6 classes of use of surface water as given in the slide from A to E, and the last class U is unclassified because of inadequate information of the required parameters, and the corresponding threshold values may be seen in this slide. Similarly, the major usage of groundwater is for irrigation, drinking, and domestic usage, so accordingly they have used the same classes for groundwater, and the corresponding threshold values can be seen in the slide. In the case of river, owing to the flowing nature of the water, the volume of the river is approximated by a specific unit of the account, the standard river unit. The value in a standard river unit of a stretch of river of length L and of flow Q is the product of L multiplied by Q. Quality account for river can be compiled by assessing the quality class for each stretch by computing the SRU value for each stretch and by summing the corresponding standard river units per quality class to populate the quality accounts. The different quality classes can then be aggregated without double counting. In the case of rivers, monitoring station-wide data is given. The water of each monitoring station shall be allocated to a unique quality classes as per the recorded value of the different quality parameters and the threshold values. In the initial phase, the water quality accounts have been compiled for Godavari River Basin for the year 2015-16 with 12 data points, one for each month, using the data on quality parameters as given by Central Water Commission for 26 monitoring stations across the basin. The detailed state-wise and month-wise quality accounts of Godavari River Basin for the year 15-16 may be seen in our publication available on the website of the Ministry. The percentage distribution of summary of month-wise quality accounts of Godavari River Basin are given in the table. A map depicting the month-wise changes in water quality across the basin may be seen in the slide. The color of each river stretch in the basin is showing the quality of the water. In case of groundwater, the data is given location-wise, which is classified into the corresponding designated best use classes of water based on the threshold values. Certain parameters could not be considered due to non-availability of information. In respect of the volume, the standard river units are replaced by net annual groundwater resources, which are available block-wise and are assumed to be equally distributed across locations within the block. Thus, quality accounts for groundwater can be compiled by assessing the quality classes for each location by aggregating the net annual groundwater resources for the different monitoring locations as per the corresponding quality classes. The groundwater quality account for the state of Punjab for the year 2015 have been compiled based on the data on groundwater quality parameters given by Central Groundwater Board for 291 sites across 119 blocks in 22 districts of the state, along with the data on block-wide net annual groundwater resources for the year 2013. The size of the bubble is showing the volume of the water at that site, and the color is showing the quality class. Similarly, the groundwater quality accounts for the state of Haryana for the year 2015 have been compiled based on the data on groundwater quality parameters provided by Central Groundwater Board for 352 sites across 97 blocks in 21 districts of the state, along with the data on block-wise net annual groundwater resources for the year 2013. The proposed methodology can also be applied for other water bodies like lakes and canals with certain modifications. A major advantage of this quality account is the capacity to depict the changes in quality over the different months and also across different stretches of water. For the ease of comprehension, this could also be depicted as maps to identify single changes of water quality. Further, since the monitoring species can be uniquely attributed to a state, so state-wise quality account can also be compiled easily if required. This is in brief about water quality indices and water quality accounts related work done by this office and the application of GIS in presentation of the result of the work for better understanding of the situation, making decisions and result-oriented policy making. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishna, for the elaborate presentation on the water quality accounts of the Godavari River in India and explaining in details about the nitty-gritties of the different quality aspects of water. We now move ahead to our next topic of presentation on the compilation of spatial distribution of IUCN Red List species. Living in harmony with nature has been an integral part of the Indian culture. We are a country which serves as home to a large number of species. The World Conservation Monitoring Center recognized 17 mega diverse countries in July 2000, of which India is one. India has tremendous biodiversity, genetic as well as species and ecosystems. In our next presentation, Dr. Ruchi Mishra will be talking about the IUCN Red List of threatened species containing global assessment for over 1,20,000 species and how the IUCN spatial datasets can be used to evaluate the species richness of the red list species for any defined region or area. I now request Dr. Ruchi to talk more about the technicalities of the subject. Over to you, Ruchi.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the ENVISTATS India GIS webinar day 2. In this session, we will discuss the use of IUCN Red List spatial datasets for the assessment of species richness count in India. The IUCN Red List of threatened species is one of the most well-known objective assessment systems for classifying the status of species threatened with extinction. It contains explicit criteria and categories to classify the conservation status of individual species on the basis of their probability of extinction. The list divides species into 9 categories that are mentioned here, and any species that has been assessed as endangered, critically endangered or vulnerable or are called as threatened species. The list also includes the least concern species, those species who have a lower risk of extinction but are still important in terms of global biodiversity. It is important to monitor these species and to develop appropriate conservation action to prevent them from becoming threatened in the future. The IUCN also provides the spatial data for Red List of species. It contains global assessment for over 1,20,000 species, and more than 80% of these species have spatial datasets. They provide spatial datasets on mammals, amphibians, birds, reptiles, and fishes, and other groups of species. And the geographic coordinate system of the dataset is WGS 1984, and the unit is degrees. The data are made available in polygon in ISRI shapefile format containing the known range of each species and as comma separated tables that includes the latitude and longitude of each observation. These datasets include taxonomic information, distribution status, the IUCN Red List category, source, and other details about the species. What makes these datasets more useful? That they are freely available. These datasets can be used to assess the distribution of individual species, and also the species richness of a particular region can be evaluated by using them. So here I have shown the screenshots how to get the IUCN Red List datasets. First, the user has to go to the IUCN Red List website. The link for the same is given on the screen. Then go to the resource and publication section. Clicking on the link, a page will open and the user has to click on the spatial data download section. This will open a page where the spatial datasets are provided for the users. The data for downloading are arranged in a tabular format that is given on the screen. Main data sets are given, and also data sets are categorized into specific species groups. Now the user has to create an account on the IUCN website and has to request the required data sets. The link will be sent to user's account, and from there he can access the spatial data sets. Now coming to the species richness, it is defined as the total number of species in a particular sample or area. It represents the measure of variety simply based on the count of the number of species in that area. The figures illustrate the species richness in two areas. Looking at these figures, we see that area A has larger species richness than area B, as area A has more variety of species, but area B has only 2 or 3 kinds of species. So obviously the richness is higher in area A. Coming to the species richness count with the help of red list species, the IUCN spatial datasets contain information on the known range of each species. Thus, these datasets can be used to evaluate species richness count for a particular polygon. To calculate the species richness count in India, we have used the IUCN red list spatial datasets, and the IUCN website also provides IUCN red list toolbox for ArcMap along with the global shapefiles having small grids. These toolbox can be added to ArcGIS and the species richness counts can be calculated. Here we have shown how the toolbox can be added to ArcMap, and the highlighted feature of the toolbox has been used to calculate species richness. The toolbox works in a way that it intersects the red list species polygon with a grid or shapefile of polygons. This provides the number of species per cell or per block of the polygon. The IUCN ranges summed across all species to show the number of species potentially occurring in each pixel. So after getting the species richness count, that is the number in each pixel or cell, these can be plotted using GIS visualization techniques. The species richness map shows the number of red list species found per pixel, where the pixels have area of 0.07 degrees square or roughly 865 square kilometers. To understand the distribution of red list species in India, an exercise was undertaken using IUCN spatial datasets on mammals, amphibians and reptiles. The IUCN red list of threatened species red list version 2022 that was downloaded on August 31st, 2020 is used. To assess the species richness in India, these datasets have been used in our publication ENVISTATS India Volume 2 of the year 2020. The red list is updated few times per year and the version denotes the same. We will keep updating our findings based on the updated versions, and the same will be published in our future publications. Also, we are working on the other species groups, and that will be available in our next publications. So the table on the screen shows the number of red listed terrestrial species in India under these categories as available in the IUCN spatial datasets. We see that many of the least concern species are found in India. So this table shows the species richness count in India. The table shows the species richness state-wise count in India for mammals, amphibians and reptiles. Here the state shape files have been used to get these counts. Similarly, other polygons like biogeographic zones, wetlands and protected area maps can also be used to get the area specific species richness count. Now this map shows the spatial distribution of species richness in India. The dark green color shows the higher species richness. We have also plotted the protected areas map indicated in red polygons over the species richness map. The analysis are only relevant for the terrestrial areas as marine areas are not assessed. To conclude, in this session we saw how the spatial datasets helps in visualizing the distribution of red list species and how these can be analyzed to get the species richness in area of interest. The more details on biodiversity, protected areas and other related issues can be found in our publication ENVISTATS India Volume 2. So thank you for your time and attention. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ruchi, for the excellent presentation and explaining in details about the method to calculate species richness count in the country right from the process of downloading of the data. Now we move on to the last technical session of the day on assessing land use efficiency in the cities of India. Land use efficiency is defined as the average annual rate of change of built-up area per capita. The topic highlights one of the most relevant subjects, that is the relationship between the urban expansion and demographic changes, which in turn may become a crucial aspect while framing policies pertaining to urban land use. I now request Ms. Monica to explain in detail about the land use efficiency using the administrative and remote sensing data. Over to you, Monica.
Hello, good morning everyone. Thank you, ma'am. As we all know, SDG 11 aims at making cities and settlements safe, inclusive and sustainable. Particularly, Target 11.3 aims at enhancing inclusive and sustainable urbanization. And one way to measure the progress towards this is through land use efficiency. So this PPT will depict the use of GIS using the case study of assessing land use efficiency in various cities of India. So this is the outline of the presentation. So initially we'll talk about the use of GIS in estimating the SDG indicator 11.3.1, which is nothing but the ratio of land consumption rate to population growth rate, which gives us an insight into what kind of urban expansion is occurring in the area of interest. By measuring the rate at which cities consume land against their population growth, city authorities and decision makers can project demand for public goods, services, and identify new areas of growth and influence the sustainable urban development. We'll also see the steps for estimating the same and the estimates that we got, along with their interpretation and relevance. So let's begin with the use of GIS. So firstly, we'll discuss the use of GIS to calculate SDG indicator 11.3.1. We'll see the use of GIS to calculate SDG indicator 11.3.1 and land use efficiency indicator with the help of GIS, and we could do this using the tool QGIS, using the QGIS plugin, which is the land use efficiency tool, which has been developed by Global Human Settlement Layer team, and using the Global Human Settlement Layer on built-up and population, which are the georeference layer that provide information on human settlement and population with the global coverage, and these are available at 4 data points: 1975, 1990, 2000 and 2015, which can be seen both as a limitation but is a good starting point for our analysis. So next we'll see a little bit more about these indicators in detail. Firstly, SDG 11.3.1, which is nothing but the ratio of land consumption rate to population growth rate, and the formula for calculation of these indicators is depicted on the screen, where T plus N corresponds to the current or the present year, and the T represents the initial year, and Y is the number of years between the measurement period. This ratio is difficult to capture the dynamics of the cities with negative or zero population growth rate. To overcome this, land use efficiency formulation is proposed, which is defined as the average annual rate of change of built-up area per capita. It helps in measuring progress towards SDG 11.3 as well. And to normalize it, we have multiplied it by n and multiplied it by 10 and divided by n to compare across different times. So next, sorry for the interruption. Next, the main step used for estimation of these two indicators are described in this slide. Firstly, we'll use the input data that we download from the Global Human Settlement website, which is available for 4 data points: 1975, 1990, 2000 and 2014. In our estimation, we have used the data for 2000 and 2015. and we'll import all these data points into QGIS, and then we'll clip it according to the area that we require. Initially, we clip it to India and then to the respective cities. Then we download the LUE tool and load it into QGIS, and then using this, we input the respective layers in various columns to get the estimates corresponding to the various cities. In our analysis, we estimated this for 52 million plus cities in India, and as a result of this tool, we get a map depicting land use efficiency along with a CSV file as a result. We have carried out the estimation for 52 million plus cities, and the result for one of them, that is Delhi, is shown in the presentation below. And it is shown that the SDG 11.3 for Delhi comes out to be 0.26. And these tables over here show the interpretation of both the SDG indicator as well as the land use efficiency. The table on the left shows the interpretation for SDG indicator 11.3, whereas on the right shows the interpretation for land use efficiency. And as we can see, the land use efficiency, the negative value generally indicate the loss of population and constant built-up surface. And whereas the positive value indicate a faster increment of population in comparison to the built-up increment, and values around 0 indicate a stable zone with a linear increment in both. So from the map, we can see there are more of green patches over here, which depict that there is population densification, although there are some blue patches which show that there is a decline in population. So in all, SDG and LUE, the land use efficiency indicator, both are in sync, as they both show that the population densification is there, due to which we can interpret that there is insufficient land per person in Delhi. And using this analysis, we estimated SDG indicator, which has immense importance as it is used to describe the relationship between urban expansion and demographic change. It gives us insights into land use efficiency and sustainability. Not just this, it helps in policy making by allowing decision makers to track and manage urban growth and planning. It also helps them to promote efficient use of land. Also, it has various cross-cutting linkages to other SDG indicators, as issues in urban poverty, inequality, urban planning, climate change, etc. all are linked to sustainable urbanization challenge, and which can be seen in the figure depicted in the presentation. It provides us necessary and timely information to decision makers and stakeholders in order to accelerate the progress towards enhanced and inclusive sustainable urbanization, which is needed to provide adequate infrastructure, services, amenities for improvement of living condition to all. To provide all this, there is a need for generation and dissemination of data on urban settlement and their trends, which is provided by calculating SDG indicator 11.3.1 along with land use efficiency, which can be easily combined or estimated using GIS tool as we have seen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Monica, for the fascinating presentation. We have now reached to the most important session of this two-day webinar, that is the questions and answer sessions and the user experience sharing. I'm sure the two-day seminar must have triggered within you several questions. Some of the questions have already reached us. You are free to type more questions in the chat box and we'll try our best to get them addressed. Over to you, Bhanumati ma'am.
Hello everyone. We are really happy to be reaching out to our users through this webinar, and I regret a few seconds stall in between because of some technical glitches. We have taken note of all the questions that have reached us so far, and but still, as Sudeepa just pointed out, we'll be happy to take more questions if you can type them onto the question box. Starting with the questions that were raised yesterday, the first question that I thought would require our attention is that on our Envisats publications. The Envisats India publications are being released since 2018. We've released 3 series of each of Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 1 publication is more about the environmental statistics, whereas Volume 2, we do some innovative stuff and try to attempt coming up with the environment accounts. In Volume 2, the topics covered in Volume 1 are more or less the same for each issue. So you would just see some updations or might be inclusion of a few indicators under the 6 components of environment that the FTES prescribes. However, in Volume 2, since we are trying to attend to environmental accounts, we present a different set of information in each of the publications till now. In 2018, we covered land, water, forest and mineral, which was primarily the central framework of SIA that we had followed. In the issue that was released in 2019, we tried to look into quality by addressing the soil quality indices and the water quality indices. We also covered a few ecosystem services of the cropland provisioning services and the nature-based tourism. That was 2019 publication. In 2020 publication, we've addressed a whole range of SIA ecosystem accounts. We've done ecosystem accounts for the croplands, for the wetlands, for the forests, in the formats that are prescribed under the SIA ecosystem accounts. While we do this, we know that there are several areas which we are still to touch up, and we are in the endeavor of reaching out to more of our institutions who are active in this domain to identify and to add more layers of environment in these publications. So the next, I hope the queries on and our publications have been covered. If anything else, I'm looking at the Q&A box to see if there are any other questions on the Envisats publications. So now I move on to the second topic that was related to sort of what about the other services, ecosystem services beyond the provisioning of data or beyond the provisioning services. I looked at one question that was raised yesterday about provisioning of data on commons. We have understood it to be meaning the common ecosystem services where individuals are not directly benefited. If I talk in the parlance of ecosystem services classification, that is provisioning services, regulation services and cultural services, I do find that provisioning and cultural are more of individual kind of services. Benefits are more related to the individuals. But so I'm relating this question of common services to the regulation services. Under this category, we have made our attempts to address soil erosion prevention services and carbon retention services. We are trying to cover more of such services in the future publications, and we look forward to your feedback on this. In the context of services provided by croplands beyond the provisioning services, we have attempted the soil erosion prevention services, and under the cultural services, we have attempted the nature-based recreation services. So these are I did find the response that the commons are linked with the common pooled resources. Well, I am still at a loss to understand, and that might be this could have been done better if we could have the person who's raising the question online, but the format that we're using for this current webinar does not allow that. Still, we are open to further questions on our email addresses that we'll be showing you shortly. On the next set of questions that we received was about environmental services in rural and urban areas. We do agree that there will be stronger linkages between environmental services and people living in the rural areas, especially since it is likely to be linked to their livelihood and health more directly rather than that in the urban areas. But still, because of lack of information and adequate guidance on how do we address this, and because we have just started our journey on environmental accounting, we are yet to attempt this analysis. There was also a question on what is it about, what are the indicators which can link the environmental losses vis-a-vis the mining and industrial production. Again, this is another activity that we have taken note of, and we would be attempting in our future publications. So, okay, so now the questions were methods for soil erosion prevention services. We did discuss this yesterday. Russell is the most commonly used method, but of course there are other methods as well. And since we found it easier to adopt the Russell, so we've done this. There is a whole range of literature on the methods, different methods for soil erosion prevention and preferences. But the observation here is that most of the countries are adopting the Russell for estimating the soil erosion prevention services. There was a query on soil erosion disservices, a very valid service, which in fact a valid observation, which in fact makes it necessary for us to understand what is the soil erosion prevention, that is, what are the services provided by the different ecosystems. Carbon sequestration by croplands was also questioned. We are going to be attempting that in our future publications. As regards carbon, in ENVISTATS India 2020 Volume 2, the one publication, we have attempted to give state-wise estimates of carbon retention, both in terms of physical values and monetary values. And similar estimates are likely to be prepared for the other ecosystems as well. We did observe that someone pointed out that plantations should be used for the crop provisioning services. We have actually used plantations, all plantations, for estimating the values of crop provisioning services. And that's why, if you had seen the maps, there were two different maps there, one showing the land use land cover under croplands, that is primarily croplands, and the other one was the cropland provisioning services. So wherever the cropland provisioning services had a sort of darker shade, it was primarily due vis-a-vis the LULC maps, it was primarily due to the plantations. I hope I've answered these questions on the type of services, and if there are any, I'm looking at the Q&A box to see the questions related to this. I did not find much on the ecosystem services. I'll be next taking up the queries on the data sets that we have used, or whatever we have attempted through on. And there was a query on what are the basic IUCN Red List categories. I hope this would have been answered by the presentation made by Dr. Ruchi today. There was a question on how challenging was it to combine different natural resources because they belong to different years. Actually, till now, we have not attempted to sort of combine data sets from different years to compile the accounts. What we have done is, for instance, I can give you the example of water quality. For water quality, we've just assessed the water quality for the years for which the groundwater resources was available. However, going ahead, I do see this as a challenge since we would be required to compile annual accounts, And when we do that, we might need methods to extrapolate data for these benchmark years using some auxiliary variables so as to be able to compile annual estimates. In this direction, we would be working for the next couple of years on the methods, but as of now, it's more of trying to, at least collect all the data sets that are relevant to this region and to this area, and to combine and present information for the data sets that are available, for the years that are available. There was a mention on whether shape files could be made available. We are working on that. There are two issues here. We are still working on the technological challenge so as to be able to share these shape files through our websites. It may also be noted that the base layers that we've used primarily belong to those of the Survey of India or the National Remote Sensing Center. And as such, we may need to get into some sort of understanding. There may be certain copyright issues related to these shape files, which we would need to sort out. So I don't see that happening immediately, but yes, we've taken note of this and thanks for the suggestion. There was also a query on whether we would be able to relook at the status and compare in respect of environmental improvements seen after COVID-19. I won't say that I can do a before and after of COVID-19 because it's not for all of the environmental areas that we have done the environmental accounts. We've done that only for a limited set. But of course, for these areas where we have already attempted some accounts, we would be providing some updates, and these updates may be able to catch up some of the changes that happened during the COVID pandemic. However, since again we have not attempted an annual account in most cases, it may or may not be possible. I'll leave this question for future and expect the numbers to reveal themselves whether we are able to do the analysis or not. Dr. Bethana Jackson and Dr. Rubianka Benateves, they both from the Victoria University of Wellington, both presented the global data sets that are available for environmental accounting. And in this context, I did find a few queries on the availability of these global data sets to practitioners. Yes, these global data sets, the ones that we are trying to assess, are available for the public, and people can log in. They'll of course need to create a login, but they can log in and try to use the data sets, and that's why our preference for the global data sets, since people can actually replicate them, which will help us also validate the information. Let me take just a brief pause to tell you that today's questions, I'm not able to keep track of all of them, so I'll come back to them a little later after I finished yesterday's set. So please don't feel ignored. It's not that I'm not trying to answer, but it's just that we'll wait for a while before we attend to today's questions. There was a question on whether the TEEP framework has been assessed and how does our current work map with the TEEP framework. The TEEP framework, as I see, was a very valuable one, and the idea was to raise awareness of the issues, of the environment-related issues through valuation. However, because their focus was on certain issues, it was sort of a microscopic view on an issue. The CR framework, on the other hand, helps provide a holistic view of the environment, both its stocks and the flows of all the environmental goods and services. Because it's in a structured format and it does not really talk about a particular issue, the data set can be used for multiple purposes for analyzing various issues. However, it does not really give you the answers to all of the questions, just like the TEEP framework does. But the TEEP framework restricts itself to one question at a time. The reason why we are adopting the CR framework is one, it is the most sort of debated framework and accepted framework everywhere So we know that the methods that have been prescribed by the SIA have international acceptance and a consensus. And that's why the National Statistical Office has been trying to move in the direction of implementation of the SIA framework. Let me also let you know that India is a member of the UN Committee of Experts on Environmental Accounting. We are an active part of the UN Statistics Division, which is deliberating on the new manual on ecosystem services, the SIA ecosystem services. And we do look forward to all your support to the NSO so that we can perform better. I hope the yesterday's data questions are okay. There is one big bunch on the natural capital accounting, which I'll take later. So over to today's questions. Let me take them in the order that they have been presented. So what are the limitations while preparing the surface and groundwater accounts? As I just did make a mention, often the limitation is that data sets are not of quality and of resources are not available for the same year, which makes it a problem. However, at a macro level, I find that the availability of data sets is quite sound and in the terms of Indian data sets, and it's actually useful. So we did not observe many limitations there. What is the best tool to make water quality maps in GIS? Well, it depends on the availability of information. I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all solution to it. But of course, if you have the relevant maps, you could do sort of mapping as we have done of both the resources and the quality in the same map, which is more informative. But I think rather than us answering this question is rather valid for GIS specialists, which we lack in the National Statistical Office. We do have limited expertise here. How do you measure the pollution load between two stretches of river? Just quality is not adequate. Okay. So what we have done is that we have, since we took the complete data of the Godavari River Basin, what we have done is we have assumed that the quality measured at one point at one monitoring station continues to the next monitoring station. This is an assumption that has been made. I know that there could be limitations and there could be variations in quality over the stretch of water till the next point. But still, I do feel that the way monitoring stations have been set up, they quite well capture the industrial effluents lying in between and the agricultural residuals being passed on to the water resources in between. So this does seem to be a very good proxy to understand the changes in water quality over different water stretches. I hope the question has been answered. Okay, then you have, how do I get access to well locations of CGWB and other details of the well? You mentioned the source, and I think the only way to get access is to contact them. You can contact CG Central Groundwater Board for the information. A lot of information is there on the website of Central Groundwater Board, and maybe you would like to have sort of a visit that to explore further on their website. And if there are any queries, please raise them to Central Groundwater Board. Okay, whether any quality assessment of input data has been made or any assessment of uncertainty of the output. We have actually, the way it is structured, the accuracies or the inaccuracies of the source data do become a part of our compilations, and we have not really done a very good quality assessment as of now. But the choice of sources, of course, when we select a particular source, we do consider that whether it is, let's say, the question is from NRSE. So if suppose the we've not adopted the land use land cover maps for the annual numbers, which are at a much coarser resolution, rather than the ones that are quinquennial. So we have made an effort to take the most accurate information that's available. But of course, we've not yet done this assessment, and we're taking note of this and will surely reflect on it in our future publications. The presentations will of course be shared with all of you, let me also tell you that the recordings of these webinars will also be available on YouTube for all the users. There was a question on keystone species, hotspot, and mega diversity country. Preserve species can GIS. Of course, we do see that GIS has a key role, especially in terms of biodiversity preservation, because the maps are interesting and makes it easier to explore and analyze. So I do see a relationship here, but I skip to the next question. Is your map using Diva GIS? I don't think I'm using that. We make use of ARC and ArcGIS and QGIS for most of our mapping purposes. Janvi, I'm really sorry, I'm not able to get through to your question. Might be we can take it offline to understand that what is it that we're talking about when talking about common pool resources and their provisioning. There's a question on whether CSO, let me just tell you that we are now referred to as the National Statistical Office and not the Central Statistics Office. But yes, coming back to the question, we are of course attempting to make valuation of ecosystem services. If you look at our publications, the cropland provisioning services, the nature-based recreation services, timber provisioning services, NTFP provisioning services, and carbon retention services are all presented in monetary values. And we are making efforts to cover more and more ecosystem services, both in physical and monetary terms, so that users, whichever way they require the information, we can provide to them. Have you explored the Google Earth engine for Envisats assessment? Is there a tool in QGIS for IUCN and REDLIST assessment? Okay, so IUCN and REDLIST assessment, you can also do it in QGIS, though ARC, because there is a ready tool for ARC, it becomes easier, but there are reference papers which you may like to refer to. In case you don't find them, you can send us a request, we can share them with you. There are papers on how the analysis can be conducted in QGIS as well. It does take a lot of time, but in case you do not have access to ArcGIS, it's you can actually create all those maps on Q as well. Dr. Kailash Chandra, thank you so much for your compliments. All of our work is hugely sourced from our data source agencies. ZSI is one of our key data sources, and they've been helpful throughout in our understanding of biodiversity. And of course, we'll be sharing all the PPTs with everyone. I skipped the next question. Is there a Q tool in QGIS? Have you explored? Am I repeating the questions? What is the amount of data that is available in public domain? How much is freely accessible in terms of environment data sets? All the information that we have compiled, all the data sets that are brought out by us are available in the public domain. And it's available both in PDF and Excel formats. And we are also looking at options when people can download in a database format so that they can analyze it and make better use of it. But if you're asking from the source data, from the environmental data from the sources, Some of it may be in the public domain, and some of it may not be. They would have been shared with the Ministry of Statistics under a certain memorandum of understanding. So it may not be there in public domain. However, we are yet to make, might be in the next publication, we can make an assessment and put that as part of our, as part of our publication, so that users find it interesting to understand how much of it can they do it on their own. Is it possible to do a neighborhood level assessment using GHSL and land use efficiency tool? The references that I've read, the literature that I've read so far on the use of global human settlement database and land use efficiency tool limit to the analysis at the city level rather than at a neighborhood level. However, Norway and many other areas, you do find neighborhood level analysis using Google Earth maps. So you might want to check up on that on the internet, or JRC is a very good source for much of this information. By JRC, I mean the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. Do you also suggest preventive and predictive measures to government on protecting the species, forests and other ecosystems? The idea of having a CR framework is to provide information at a macro level rather than at a very low granular level. So that being the mandate, they can act as, let's say you go to a doctor, you get your temperature first measured and then your BP. And if there is a problem, then you check for, you send for further diagnostic procedures. I look at these accounts in the same way. They do inform on a macro level that whether or not the status of environment is proceeding in the right direction. But for preventive, predictive measures on a detailed scale, I think more of introspection would be required, and SIA may not be able to address at that level. Is the ENVIStats providing any inputs for the National Environment Survey? Rather than providing inputs, we feel that we are the first and foremost consumers of this information that may arise from the National Environment Survey of the MOEFCC. Okay. Are we looking forward for ISRO Bhuvan portal lookalike for environment database sharing? Oh yes, we are looking forward to that. But as I said, there is a sort of, there are a lot of technicalities involved there. So this may not happen immediately. But yes, we would be looking forward to release something of that kind. As relating to fiscal policies and climate responsive budgeting, it's a very interesting topic actually, and so much required as on date. And that being the case, I don't think our accounts have matured to a level that they can inform on all aspects of climate change or climate responsive budgeting. But still, we are working with DEA to understand their requirements, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change requirements, to see in a best way to respond to all of these queries. Now, there was a complete set of questions on the natural capital accounting and valuation of ecosystem services. India is part of the EU-funded Natural Capital Accounting and Valuation of Ecosystem Services project that is, sort of spearheaded by UNSD, UN Environment, and CBD. On behalf of India, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation is the sort of implementation partner of this project, whereas the MOEFCC is the technical sort of support in this project. Under this project, we've been able to accomplish several things, including a landscape analysis of about 150 odd studies that have been done in India on environmental accounting. Let me also inform you that using these studies, we are also planning to look to upload a sort of tool, a curable database of these studies that a user can use, and rather researchers can use, to understand that what is it that an ecosystem service value can be put for a particular ecosystem of a particular state. So that's the kind of analysis that we are trying to put up on the website of MOSPI. Under the project again, it is we've got several support, several types of support. We got technical support from the Victoria University of Wellington to understand how do we use the different global data sets to do the accounts. We got technical guidance from the EU JRC, from the UNSD on the types of data sets that can be used for the compilation. So it's under these guidance that mechanisms that were available to us, we were able to do the cropland provisioning services, where we have used the resource rent method. We were able to do the nature-based recreation services, where we have used the willingness to pay. For the carbon retention services, we've made use of the social cost of carbon, which is relatively quite old in literature, but quite new in terms of official statistics parlance. Under the natural capital accounting NCAVES project, as we relate to it, the project was supposed to end in December 2020, and if the pandemic had not struck us so hard, we would have had a national forum in August this year, where all of you users and researchers could have walked in to see the amount of data sets that India has. India has a rich database of not just the studies, but also the sources of information. But because we are not able to do that, we are having a virtual forum called the NCAVES India Forum 2021. This is a virtual forum which will be, the live sessions will be held on 14th, 21st and 28th of January 2021. However, the site for the forum would be almost available for the complete month. And after 14, users can walk into the visit the forum, visit the site to understand the different data sets, different technical guidance available. So we want to make it a sort of catch-all kind of a site where you would have guidance material from UNSD, from UN Environment. You would have reports as released from NRSC or FSI, the ones that are there in a public domain. So in one site, you'll have access to all of this information. Additionally, you'll have live sessions on the international organizations like the World Bank, the UNEP, the UNFCCC, the FAO, all of them talking about why CI is relevant, what policies can be directly affected by these accounts, and how is it that we make use of such information. We would also be showcasing about the thematic accounts of biodiversity, accounts related to climate change in that particular event. We cannot let go of the richness that India has in terms of technical expertise. So a complete day and a lot of stalls, if I may call them, they'll be virtual, but you'll have a lot of stalls from our official agencies like the Forest Survey of India, the National Remote Sensing Center, the Soil and Land Use Survey of India, and so on and so forth, where you would have access to all the literature in one place. So that's the effort, and we do look forward to you registering for the forum and making use of the opportunity to look at India's rich set of environment accounting information. We would also have live sessions, as I said. So the World Bank Global Director, the UNSD Director, the UNSCR Assistant Secretary General Dr. Elliot Harris, Stephen Schoenfest. We'll all be addressing different sessions. The complete schedule and other details will be available on the website. The forum should be up for registration by December 15th or the third week, and please do register so that you get timely updates on the type of information that can be obtained. I think I've covered all the questions. Can you give your view on reanalysis versus observation data? Sorry, Dr. Praveen Kumar, I'm really not that well conversant with the environmental concepts. I'm more of a statistician. My role as that of a statistician is that to ensure application of coherent frameworks which can best be used in the Indian context and which are in line with the international recommendations. I did miss a question. I think yesterday is about machine learning. Of course, machine learning, AI are all part of the natural capital accounting. Environment is very sort of rich, and we cannot do an analysis if we do not take all the new techniques on board. I'll just take a second's break here. I do want to introduce to you my team, which has been working for this session and for the complete set of accounts. So give us just a few seconds so that we put all our videos on and take off this slide, and you're able to see the complete set of people who are working on this. Stop share. Hello, I sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. So Kajal is working with this division and many of the queries. All of us here are from the statistical background, and we are all members of the Indian Statistical Service. Next up is Dr. Sudipta Ghosh, who is again working with us. She has a rich background of national accounts as well. And now she has joined the environment accounts team to see how economic accounts can be integrated to the environment accounts. Now live is Krishna Tiwari, Krishna Kumar Tiwari, and Krishna has earlier worked with education and is now with the environment accounts team. He'll be in charge of mostly the NCAVES India Forum, so please feel free to ask him all the queries regarding the forum if at all you have any. All of our details, contact details are there on the MOSFE's website, and we do hope to see a lot of queries after this user webinar at least. Next is Kuwar Alok Singh Yadav. He's the person who is dealing with the waste and water accounts, a major chunk of our work. And up next, let me also inform when we are coming out with our next publication in September, we should be releasing some updates on the water quality accounts and adding to it some of the waste accounts. This is Dr. Ruchi Mishra. She is the latest entrant to the group, if I may say so, but the most contributing person. All the maps, interesting maps of IUCN, of soil erosion, and all the GIS related work was done by Dr. Ruchi Mishra. And this is Dr. Monica Sharma. I think she'll soon be doctor rather. So she's the one who's worked on water quality accounts and tourism accounts. She's a UN consultant, by the way. Just in case you missed me, I'm Bhanumati. I'm Deputy Director General in the Social Statistics Division. I know it's very difficult for you to understand the divisions per se, but in the National Statistical Office, we have been trying to make certain inroads into environment accounting, but it's most important for us to get feedback and support from all of you users who've logged onto the webinar. Thanks once again for joining us. I'm actually, looks like I'll be ending the webinar before time due to lack of information, but might be I can share with you some short video which shows why it's important for us to look at environment accounts. Interesting YouTube video on environment accounting.
How can we halt biodiversity loss and protect our natural environment? Accounting. Yes, accounting. When we think of accountants, we don't often think tree hugger, but maybe we should. Accountants could be the new activists. Accounting is the practice of recording financial transactions and reporting the results. Every day, decisions are made on the back of clear and accurate accounts, so accounting can be a powerful tool. Every country maintains national accounts. This is how we get measures like national expenditure and GDP. But these accounts don't reflect trends in environmental quality or degradation. How can we account for nature? Our coasts, wetlands and forests can also be thought of as assets that need to be maintained and managed. Just like in business, if you don't invest in your assets, they will depreciate over time. This is where natural capital accounting comes in. Natural capital accounting is a systematic way to measure and report on stocks and flows of natural capital. Organising this information can help decision makers understand how the environment interacts with the economy. So, if we have an ecosystem like a wetland, we can account for things like the stock and quality of the water there and the richness of the species present. This gives us a clear description of the asset, or natural capital. But why do we care about this? For this part of the story, we need to consider the flows from the asset, called ecosystem services. The wetland provides a whole range of ecosystem services, like water purification, sediment retention, habitat for species, and cultural enjoyment. Natural capital accounting brings different sets of accounts together under one framework. The accounts consider the extent or size of the asset and how it changes over time, the condition, for example, is the wetland drained or functioning well? The services that the asset provides. Is the wetland storing and filtering water by natural processes? And of course, benefits for humans and wildlife, like high water quality. Natural capital accounting can be carried out at different scales: a wetland, a river catchment, a county, and a national scale. These accounts can help us make decisions about how we can work with our environment, our society, and our economy. But the final piece of the puzzle is linking natural capital accounts to our national accounts. The UN has developed a standard for doing just this. The standard is called the SEAP, or System of Environmental Economic Accounting. SEAP brings together environmental and economic information to produce internationally comparable statistics. Over 80 countries around the world are already implementing the SEAP. And in 2020, the SEA will be included as an indicator for measuring the Sustainable Development Goals. Simply put, we don't currently account for nature in our decision-making. Natural capital accounting helps us to do that and make more informed decisions across a range of sectors, including health, farming, tourism, and planning. Follow the InCase project to see how Ireland can begin this journey and start making nature a part of our future. See ya!
I hope you've been able to hear me for this. Just a minute before I catch up with you. Yes, so I think we are back, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. Over to you, Sudeepta, for some closing remarks before we bid you all bye, and hope you join all of us in the NKS India Forum. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Today's seminar or rather the webinar has been very informative. Very feedback.